Welcome to the Live Full, Work Fun podcast. This is the show to encourage you to live your life to the fullest and do fun work that fuels your lifestyle. Hi, I'm your host, Gayla Scrivener. Every week, you'll be introduced to amazing guests, useful resources, and inspirational stories. You'll discover opportunities and perspectives to shape your version of living full and working fun. Hi there, and welcome to the show, where we explore topics that help you create your lifestyle to live full and work fun. Today, I have a very special guest, Genesis Eakes, founder and president of Genesis Eakes International. Now, Genesis believes that businesses exist to solve the world's greatest problems. A worldwide, highly sought-after executive mentor, consultant, and speaker, Genesis is well-versed in the importance of asking key questions most business leaders won't ask themselves. She brings over 25 years of experience in leadership development, strategy, high-performance team building, and training to her work in a variety of industries. Trained and mentored by Dr. John C. Maxwell, the #1 leadership expert in the world, Genesis is equipped with the tools, resources, and experience to help you and your team improve your productivity, performance, and profitability. Today, Genesis and I will be discussing the importance of knowing your work style, whether you're looking for something purely transactional or your work to be more relational. Genesis explains the difference between the two, and our conversation comes at it from different angles, from the importance of a company to choose their dominant work style and to create a culture around it, and from the perspective of an employee seeking out a job that would fit them best to an independent contractor working with the perfect client. Knowing our tendencies toward transactional versus relational work is important to be more satisfied when it comes to earning a living. Let's dive in and hear from Genesis herself about how we can create work that is fun and find a culture that fits our work style. Well, hello there, Genesis. I am so glad to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much, Kayla. I am excited to be here and just honored that you would give me this opportunity to speak with you again and speak to your audience. I love the work that you're doing and excited to be here.
We get the chance to talk a lot, and we talk a lot about the workforce, leadership, a lot of things that's happening, just out there in the work life. For me, for practically all of my adult life, I've held this belief that we all have this opportunity to create a lifestyle, to live a full life. We have that opportunity. It's our choice. And then we can do work in areas where we find joy, and that work sustains our joy-filled life and, our fulfilled life. But I don't think that a lot of people had that mindset until the pandemic happened. And that seemed like a lot of people had a wake-up call. I think that through the pandemic a few years ago, that many people had that wake-up call that there's something more to life and work, and a shift of priorities had happened. Attitudes about work seem to have changed and how work fits into our lives. The result that we saw in the work first attitude, at least from my perspective, was all that buzz several months ago with the Great Resignation and job shifting and job shuffling. Are we still seeing the effects of this shift of attitude, or has it settled down and everything's just like it used to be?
Well, I think the short answer is no, it is not like it used to be. And yes, I think we're still seeing this interesting phenomena I think when we're looking at it, it's really like looking at the culture and like the world of work in a little bit broader strokes, because not everything that we're going to be talking about might be relevant to a specific company, because maybe there's pockets of companies that have resolved the issue, resolved it for them and their employees, and there's not questions there. But I think what we're talking about is the bigger, broader topic about the world of work and the world of people going to work, and what does that look like, and what are they saying and feeling. And what we're looking at right now is not necessarily a lot of the resignation, there's this huge exodus when you hear terms of bantering around, like the great resignation that was happening back in 2021 and even some of 2022. But what we're seeing a lot more in the world of work is quiet quitting, which is a different phenomenon where people they're still at their job, but they're not at their job, meaning they're not fully present. They're just, and it's a version of quitting while they're still collecting a paycheck. And that's causing some issues. Employers are going, oh, now I don't know what to do about this.
Really? So why do you think that people, us in the workforce, and then companies are struggling?
Well, oddly enough, Gayla, I think it's something that's actually rooted in history. But what we're seeing right now is this interesting struggle. And I call it kind of a push-pull between transactional style work and more relational style work. And the reason why I say that it's based in history is because if we go back, work has been around for a long time. I would contend that even people in caves would say with their hunter-gatherer lifestyles, there was some work that was involved there. So there's nothing new to this concept of work. It's just, how do we do work? And in the late 1800s, we as a culture, as a society, still had a lot of the work that was being done by artisans. We had this whole industrial revolution that was taking place, and there was a lot of ways that we're being able to do things on a massive scale, because work in the world of work had advanced so much, and technology had advanced, and there's these great things that were happening. But there was this interesting thing that a lot of the working that was done, like, you think about what put the United States on the map back then, was a lot of metalworking. And it was, metalwork was being done by artisans. And there's still this very relational aspect of an artisan and an apprentice, and like this one person that had this institutional knowledge. And there wasn't just one way to do something. There's artistic flair. And it was like, well, this artist does it this way, and this company does it like this, but the end product would be steel or, whatever kind of metal that was being produced. Well, there's this guy by the name of Frederick Taylor that came along and realized, like, you know what, guys, we can be way more efficient, and we can break down these artistic components into things that can be learned by anyone, that can then, that's where we got the birth of the factories, the birth of factory workers. Henry Ford has his own version of it. And this whole interesting phenomenon got birthed as far as what we did at work. And there's this element of it becoming transactional. Like, we're just cogs in a wheel, and we're all part of like this machine, and you just did what was told to you. Now, as technology kept moving along, we do have a lot of factory workers, but there's a lot of that work is now being done by computers and robotic equipment and all of that. So as technology has continued to advance, we still have elements of this transactional style that keeps getting pushed onto employees. But then you go to the 80s, like the 70s and 80s, as work got more complex. We've got this more complex world of work with computers and all of this. There's this push for people to be able to work together in teams, right? And I don't know about you, but I remember back in the day, and I'm old, so this is what happens. And there's a lot of stuff that all of a sudden everybody was talking about. How do we make our offices work better together? And there's this whole, well, maybe we need cubicles, and let's create cubicles, and let's take down the walls of offices and create this cubicle land. But that never really created the harmony and like the team atmosphere that they were hoping, because there was still this style of, yeah, but they're just cogs in a wheel. We just need people to push paper. We just need them to do different things, right? I do a lot of work. I know, I do some work with people in the military, and there's a concept even in the military where I just need you to put your brain in the foot locker. I'll tell you what to think, right? They didn't want them to bring their brain to the job. They just, put that in the foot locker and just show up. And I think there's this huge managerial style that even though the work that people were doing was more complex, they didn't necessarily want them bringing their brain to work. Right? They didn't, it was just do what I tell you to do, just do this job with these parameters, very similar to the factory worker, and efficiency was king. And they just keep drilling down. How can we process this? How can we make it into more process oriented so people have to think less? Well, keep fast forwarding, because people were like, you know what? I want to think. I want to do work that matters. I want to bring my whole self to work. And there's this whole push in like the early 2000s where they're like, let's get rid of all of the cubicles. Let's just have these open work environments. Let's bring in pool tables and games, and let's do life together. Let's just have fun. And there was this big push for that. And then all of a sudden we're like, well, where does the line between work and home, and what does that look like? And do I want all of my friends to be only at work? And then you've got this weird dynamic about, relationships in the workplace and all kinds of crazy stuff. And then going back to your question about the pandemic, here we are at the pandemic, and our relational components with work really got shut off. Yes, we could do Zoom, and, we pivoted and kind of got back into some swing of things, but it really pushed that pause button for a lot of people and really helped them start reevaluating and saying, okay, what do I want work to be for? Do I want it to be relational? Do I want my relationships to be connected at work? Do I want to be, in some respects, kind of forced, right? There's this element of, when you think about teamwork and how teams work, it's like, okay, if I'm your supervisor, I need you to be in close relationship with these other people on your team, because that's where you get the best out of teamwork, is when you know each other, you know how each other think. There's a lot of grace for intentionality. You're communicating better, all of those things. But then there's this other part where it's like, well, yeah, but I have friends and family and other places where I'm getting that. Can't I just show up for work and just do this and not have to worry about the messy parts of relationship? So now that was a long answer, but I think this is some of the things that we're dealing with right now. And as a whole, trying to look at, is it possible, or do we want to be transactional in our work and just more like that factory worker that does this thing, then leaves at the end of the day and we're done? Or do we want that relational component? And does the type of work we're doing necessitate the more teamwork focused work that it takes, where you're bringing your whole self to work, that ability to think, contribute the best of who you are, and create those relationship dynamics that get more out of that work product?
Transactional versus relational. I can see how we as individuals need to kind of evaluate ourselves on what is it that we need and what we prefer, because I'm sure that's, there's a preference there. Is either way wrong?
Yeah, I don't think that it is a right or wrong issue. It's not that. And I would also contend, Gayla, that, you're saying, maybe evaluate yourself. What do you want? I think sometimes there's seasons as well. Like maybe at one particular time in your life, if I'm thinking back on my own career path and my own work history, there were times in my life when I was just going crazy with young kids at home and a crazy schedule between kids and demands on the family, and that, like, the mom that I wanted to be, that I might have preferred a more transactional style work environment at that time, something that I didn't have to take home, that I could really focus on the relationships that I wanted to build. But then looking at a different time and a different season, maybe as kids have grown and all of that, going, you know what, I actually want to be able to contribute more and not have it just be transactional, but to be really able to invest in my mind and teamwork and brainstorming with others and getting the best out of that type of environment. So I do think that it can be a both and it's probably not just one thing for one person for their whole career life. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that prescriptive.
You make a great point, because we do have seasons in our life where there's different things. And sometimes it's like, normally you might want to be really involved and have that teamwork, but then something, it's like, hey, it's kind of nice to go in and just be transactional and not have the responsibility of thinking of one more thing and problem solving. I love how you mentioned that. I've heard or I've read that there seems to be a shift from employee-employer relationship to independent contracting type of relationships. On the surface, it might seem to be that employer-employee relationship would be more relational, and then the independent contractor would be the transactional. Is that the case?
It doesn't have to be, and that's the great thing, is that there's room for both defined relationships, if you will, whether it's employee-employer or contractor and employer. Either way, and there's room for you to build those relational aspects into it. But I think it requires intentionality, because sometimes, and depending on the scope of work, when it is more like that contractor base, and that is one of the things that we're seeing, is that a huge rise out of the pandemic. And again, not a good or a bad thing. It's just created opportunity for things to be different. Is there's more of a tolerance and an ability for remote work. And I know a lot of people in your audience love that ability to either be hybrid or fully remote and being able to work from anywhere. It's a great luxury that we get to have in this modern economy, which is fantastic. And again, the tolerance and the number of businesses and the opportunities that are there have just exploded on the other side of the pandemic. Now, I will say one of the other things that's happened, again, it's probably an unintended consequence maybe, is when people didn't necessarily realize the difference in what could happen when we're not necessarily seeing each other every day, when we are more hybrid or fully remote. There's a level of an intentionality that has to be in place in order to create the relationship style work. So if you are looking for your voice to be heard and to be able to contribute more to, hey, this is how we can better work processes, and this is what I'm seeing over here that might impact this over here, and being part of this bigger picture and being able to influence at a bigger level, that's going to be a more relationship style environment versus more transactional. This is the job that I get paid to do. I'm going to do that. I'm going to make sure that I'm logging in at the time I need to, that I'm logging out when I need to, that I am producing the work that's expected of me. And then I'm handing it off at the right times and I'm done. I'm like, that was great. Cool. Now I'm going to go hiking or biking or whatever that looks like for the individual. But I think when we don't understand the intentionality that it takes to ask for what you want, or to make sure that your expectations are in the right place, whether it is more transactional, it's like, hey, I just want to do the job and not have to be involved in other meetings and really doing all of sometimes people get frustrated with team building aspects, or like, oh, I don't want to do any more of that. I don't care what their dog looks like or what's happening with their families. I just want to do the work and hand it off. That's a very different style. And there's a very different expectation that goes with that.
I love that you said that, because as you're saying that, it's like I was reflecting on how I first started my business. It was more transactional. And it's just like, okay, this is the little piece of the project that I did, that little piece, checked it off my list, and then it goes. And we've evolved to be, you know me, relationships mean a lot, and long term with our clients. And it is possible, but I can see within my own business how it's evolved and how my internal needed to go into that relational type of business. Now, I've like the relationship, and we have a very small team, but what you're seeing out there are companies that are struggling to retain and kind of curb that silent quitting. What are you seeing that companies are doing that continue them to be struggling?
Well, I think what's happening is they may not be fully aware of these rumblings and some of where it's coming from. So sometimes it just starts with that, and we just start throwing the proverbial spaghetti up against the wall, trying to see, like, I don't know, something's happening and I don't know what it is. So some of it could be an awareness, because I do think that this is a fairly new thing where people are finally starting to talk about it and go, whoa, I think that there's, just being able to identify that there's two different styles, and both styles can work, but they have very different immediate day-to-day. What does that look like in the day-to-day? And what does that look like? And what does your culture look like? Those two things are very, very different. And I think some of the struggles that companies are having is if they're not aware, then they're not intentionally making a choice. And sometimes what happens is that it ends up watering down their culture. So they're trying to be kind of like this, all things to all people, and like, well, sure, we can be transactional if you want, or we can be relational if you want. And then that ends up in this no man land of there's no distinctiveness. And they lose the essence of what their company was built on, who they are. And I think it really goes back to their mission. And what does that mission look like? What's the purpose of your company? And it sounds like that is a lot of the journey that you as a business owner have gone through with your own company. And I love that example where you're talking about, like, you know what, weirdly enough, we started off kind of transactional because we were contractors and had clients, and this is kind of what we were contracted to do work. But you figured out over time that with the complexity of the work that you guys do, the effectiveness is going to come not necessarily from efficient processes, although you guys have really good efficient processes, but it's going to come from the depth of relationship and being able to share that collective consciousness to be able to respond the way and craft messaging and do all kinds of things the way that your clients would, and then being able to offload this huge amount of responsibility over to you and your team, because there's this collective way that you're thinking together versus transactional, where they're just telling you, hey, go do this, and you guys go do it. Because then there's no empowerment for you guys to really be able to think into it and to bring some of your own innovation and your own thinking into it that would really up level and make it better. So I think what companies are struggling with is if they're not intentionally choosing which style that they want to go with, because it could be something I would love to see. I heard this actually from Patrick Lencioni. He mentioned this, that it would be kind of an interesting concept if employers started putting it somewhere on their employment boards or their website somewhere. Hey, we're a relational company. So this is what you can expect when you come to work for us. When you come to work here, we're going to expect you to get to know each other. We're going to expect you to function as a team. We're going to want to get to know you. We're going to want, relationship with you. And it comes with all of this. Or, hey, we're a company that's more transactional. You're not going to have to spend time in all of these meetings getting to know people. You're not going to do that. We're going to be clear on what's expected of you. We just want you to do that. Do that, and we're going to all get along great. And then there's the right expectation so that people can self-select. this is what I would like to be a part of, or this is what I'd like to be a part of. And I think conversely, the marketplace will also, people that are customers, they select the businesses or the organizations that they want to work with. Especially when they understand, like people that like to work with you and Scribner Solutions, they understand from the beginning that it's going to be a relationship. And if they're looking for someone that's more transactional, then probably you won't be long-term clients for one another.
That brings me to thinking, do you have any advice for or things to look for as people in the workforce looking for the right fit of working with a company? Do you have any signs to look for? Because you just said, wouldn't it be cool to have the sign, hey, we're a relationship type company or we're a transactional? Then I know which way to go. But what are those subtle signs that we could look for to know that it might be a better fit?
Well, I think you can look at the languaging that companies use on their websites. I think that that's usually pretty intentional, and they're crafting those messages carefully, hopefully, and with a lot of intention, saying, "Hey, this is who we are. This is what we're about." But I would also say that when you are, that can give you like that first look and say, okay, what kinds of language are they talking more about? People and relationships and working together. And you can look for those words that would signify team and collaboration and like all of those relational type words. Or are they talking more about work product and outcomes? And not that you don't get outcomes in the relational, but you'll notice a difference in tone between how companies present themselves. And you're going to be able to see from the outset, what is this company driven by? What's their bottom line? What's really going to be a driving force in their culture? And that can help give you some ideas on, hey, do I want to apply for this at this company or not? But once you kind of decide, yeah, I'll give it a shot. The job sounds interesting. It sounds like it might be a cultural fit from that relational transactional side. But once you get into that interview process, it's going to be really important to ask the right questions. And what I mean is you being able to be honest in that interview process and asking them, saying, hey, teamwork is really important to me. Being in a collaborative environment where my voice is heard and where I'm valued, I'm able to give input, where I'm known, where I'm seen, where I get to know and understand and see others. That's really important to me. And talking about things will that fit on your team? Would that fit within that's a great question to ask in an interview. Or if you're on the other side that says, hey, where I'm at in my life right now, I am looking to not take things home at the end of the day. I don't want to have to be worried about things that are sitting out there or projects, or I want to be able to have specific work and work-life boundaries are very important to me. I want to be able to do this and then shut it off and not have that interfering or people pinging me or, that's those sorts of things. Those are very important questions to be able to ask that direct employer and say, would that fit in your environment? And let them answer that question.
And I would think that as a leader, if you're a leader in an organization and you're interviewing folks, it's just flipping those questions just a little bit to weed out to see if the person tends toward wanting at this particular time transactional versus relational. But this just popped into my mind. What happens if you as an employee are in a different season and you were really into the relationship building and that's where it was, but then you've had a shift in your personal life and now you want to be more transactional, but you work for somebody that is like, oh, is that where you just silently leave? Or is there something that you can do to make it to where it doesn't turn into? Is that the sign that maybe your job doesn't fit well with your lifestyle anymore and that you do need to change?
Well, I think on the side where companies are more relationship based, where there is a lot of relationship equity and teamwork that's happening there. Typically, that environment, you can have a conversation. So if things have shifted in your personal life, is I know I'm also in a season where I'm kind of looking ahead, and I have a aging parents, and looking at a time when I might need to be a little bit more hands-on with their care. And there's different things that could be required of me during that time. I know my brother is doing a lot of care with my father right now, and he has chosen for himself. He has his job is a little bit more in that transaction base. He's I would call him like an individual contributor, if you will. And he's very high level, is doing work that he loves to do, and gets to do a lot of creative thinking in his specific area. But at the end of the day, he gets to compartmentalize that and then really focus in on doing some more of that specific care for our dad, which is really great. What I'm trying to say in all of this is that you can have the conversation, because maybe where there's an opportunity to restructure your job. So giving that employer every opportunity to make adjustments. And when you have a more relationship-based workforce and a work environment, I think those conversations are easier to have, and there's opportunities to look and to reshift. I'm working with a client right now to help them restructure some job functions for an employee that has had some life change and some shifting going on, and saying, okay, you know what? We're a team. And so how can we just shift some things on our team so we can keep this team member that we value and we care about? We just need to shift some load for them for a period of time. So I'm working with them on that element. I think the harder part, and this is maybe just my own experience, the harder part is when you're in a transaction-based company, and like that's their culture, and your expectation is that it's more relational. And so when you are wanting it to be more relational, because we're hearing a lot, especially from the younger generation that's entering the workforce, is they're looking for relationship. They're looking for mentors and connection, and they want their voice to be heard. And they've got all of these great ideas and new things that they're entering into the workforce with, and wanting to make their mark and contribute. And if they are in an environment that is more transactional, they feel shut down. They feel unheard. They feel unseen. They're like, yep, just go away. And so that can be a little bit more of a frustration. And again, an honest conversation that says, hey, is there an opportunity for me to be able to move into a sphere where my voice can be heard? Is there a pathway forward here? Or is that just not part of our culture? Because then that will inform your decision on whether you need to look elsewhere, or if there's opportunity within that company.
This has been so helpful. I'm glad that you joined me today. I know that you work with companies for culture change, culture alignment with their mission, culture alignment with strategy. Culture is a big thing. So being able to have a transactional, and what you had mentioned is choosing. How do you work with companies on building their culture or aligning their culture with their mission?
Well, it really depends on the company, because everybody's at a different starting place. And oddly enough, companies are just as unique as each and every individual person. And the place where our lives intersect, they could be at a very different, they're typically at very different places. So sometimes it looks like coming in with the organization and they're like, you know what, we haven't really spent a lot of time getting to know our people, and we'd like to be more relational. Can you help us? And so then it would start off maybe with some DISC assessments and helping them understand who actually is on their team and how they like to be communicated to, and being able to pull out the strengths of who they are, and really working to create this collaborative environment. Other people may already know who they are, and they're at a different place in their work life together, and they've got a great understanding of who is on their team and what their strengths are. And maybe their challenge is more, how do we be more intentional about the culture that we're trying to create? We know who we are. We just don't as individuals, but we want to create this collective sense, and that really fits and drives our mission. And then it's a little different conversation to make sure that everything in their work processes, because here's the thing, the way that we communicate, the way that we incentivize, the way that we think about work, the way we talk about it, all the relationships, the way that we interface with our customers, everything actually affects culture, every aspect of it. And so sometimes there's an intentionality at the top, or someone has this great vision. The visionary was like, yeah, we really want this, but then there's not necessarily the alignment. And what would that look like if everything within the company was actually aimed in that one specific direction, to make sure that the whole culture is really moving in that direction? So that's a little different process, but it really just takes that conversation and saying, okay, where are you at, and what do we want to do to get your culture moving forward?
Well, thank you so much, Genesis. And how do people follow you?
Yes, they can actually, I'm on all of the social media platforms. You can find me at genesiseakesinternational.com is the website. And luckily, with a name like Genesis, it's fairly easy to find, but you can follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, and it's Genesis Eakes International or Genesis Eakes. Either way, you can find me.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kayla. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you today. And I love just having the opportunity to talk with your audience as well.
Well, thanks for being here with me today. I believe that once it clicked for me that I'm more relational when it comes to my work, I could see why I struggled with some clients. They were expecting more transactional work environment. Those words just didn't come up in conversation when entering into this work arrangement. But now I feel I have a better understanding of myself and can see cues better as we work with new clients. What are your thoughts? How do you like to work? Transactional or relational? Has it changed over the years? I know for me it has. Well, let's continue this conversation. Hop over to Facebook and post what your biggest takeaway was in today's show in the Live Full Work Fun Facebook group. Well, thanks again for listening. Until next time, have a fantastic week. Live full and work fun.